in an attempt to expand the fictional and falsehoods made during the last 100 years of the Scopes trial since 1925, I'm proudly responsible for my part because there are so many stories, facts, rumors, and lies about the Scopes trial that has been told in tens of millions of words, plays, books, documentaries. Inherit the Wind is a great entertainment movie. If you've ever saw it, put out in 1960 with Spencer Tracy and Gene Kelly and other people. The Scopes trial in reality is quite a bit different from the Inherit the Wind. But anyway, I thought that in order trying to get back to the era of what it was, that we could. I thought I'd go in a little costume in regard to the fact, and I'm going to take my jacket off because the courtroom up there now that we're going to talk about, the Centennial, it was not air conditioned, and the temperature got over 100 degrees up there, and everybody took off their jackets except one of the defense counsel by Mr. Malone, and he kept his coat and tie on until he made an argument. Unfortunately, most of this case was never heard before the jury. But he was arguing a motion to let the experts for the defense testify, who were all going to talk about this unconstitutional anti-evolution bill passed by the legislature and signed by Governor Austin Peay in March of 1925. Scopes gets supposedly arrested. He never really was in May, and then they started this trial in July, on July the 10th, and it went for 12 days, but there was less than an hour of testimony that ever heard by the jury. All of it mostly arguing on trying to get all these expert witnesses from around the world to talk against, to attack the Butler Act. But it's an interesting story, but anyway, Dudley Malone was a defense counsel, and he was the only one that never took his coat off in this 100-degree testimony. But when he got to argue about the admissibility of these experts, like lawyers did, he very slowly took his jacket off. And that's, in regard and the effect of it, got him the ranking of the best lawyer in the trial, even though Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan were supposed to be the star. I'll leave this right here.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, trying to prepare for this, it's pretty hard to cut down 100 years of fact fiction in the history of the Scopes trial. But in regard to the handouts, I'm going to go through these very quickly. And I know the rules in civic clubs, 1 o'clock, the horn blows, and you better get out. I hate to say it, but they said I could have additional 5 minutes, which hopefully will be able to up and tell you the story. This was Dayton in 1925. And that shows the train tracks. Is this it? Okay. The train tracks, and this is the same train tracks that took William Jennings Bryan to Arlington Cemetery after he died 5 days after the trial was over on July the 21st. But that shows how Dayton was. And the big problem in this whole situation is that this trial was most important factor was to bring up the economy of Dayton. Dayton had 1,900 people in it originally, and it slipped to, well, I took care of that. See if I put that back together. Okay, but anyway, it had shrunken to 1,500 people, and so it was a...
Where we can hear you.
Okay, I can't hear you, so we're on equal ground, okay? Of course, this is, go ahead, this is, of course, William Jennings Bryan, this is Clarence Darrow. If you punch it up, I'll take it. Can you do it? Okay, this is the Butler, who was the one that introduced the Butler Act, or the Anti-Evolution Act, in the Tennessee legislature. He was from John Washington Butler. He reaped a little benefits of the publicity too. I think they paid him to come attend the trial trial and so forth. There was no question about the fact that the issue in Tennessee was very pro having this type of stopping the teaching of evolution. The next one that would come up is really this is probably the most outstanding lawyer in the trial by the name of John Neal. The reason he was the most outstanding is that you knew he was coming because you could smell him, because he never took a bath, he wore his suit to bed. He was a controversial expert, lawyer, professor at the University of Tennessee College of Law. I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, he was the first lawyer to volunteer to represent Scopes after they brought this case in by the legislature, passing the next, this is the architect of the Scopes trial. Now I'm jumping around just to give you a little few tidbits because hopefully you know more about this than I do. And there's also an opportunity to attend the symposium that's going to be in Dayton in July the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. And there's an actual, what Dayton does is they have a play. And I've seen it, and it's very well performed. And it's a takeoff. They have a play. The people dress up in local actors dress up in attire of the era. They up and also have a barbecue after. It's in an air-conditioned courtroom, and I can tell you now, I have tried cases in the courtroom, probably Tom Williams and Gary Napolitan and the other lawyers. There is a feeling of history when you are in that particular courtroom. The architect of the trial is this gentleman here. His name is George Rapollet. Rapollet was an engineer from New York City, and Rapollet was brought down to dispose of the assets of the coal mining company had gone bottoms up, and he was there, and he was the one that saw that the Tennessee legislature had up and passed this act, and there was a lot of controversy around the country. Many states were involved on the fundamental question of the origin of man, whether the Charles Darwin theory or whether you're talking about evolution or you're talking about modernism versus fundamental Christian aspect of the book of the origin of man in the Genesis part of the Bible. And this was the hot topic. And today, there was no Fox News or CNN, there was no television. The newspapers were just as mean then as the television shows are now in some of them. But anyway, it was after this bill was passed, one thing that Tennessee was that we were the first one to pass a bill in regard to Anti-Evolution Act. And so when this came out, Rapaloo, the ACLU had only been formed in 1920, and this was their opportunity for the first big case. Of course, now you know they're in every case that comes up just about. But this was the case that started the ACLU on its road to controversy. And what happened, the ACLU, after seeing Tennessee had up and adopted this act, put an ad in the Chattanooga News. The Chattanooga News was the predecessor, it was part of the Times, and they put, and the Free Press, where we have a combined paper today, put an ad saying that the ACLU would pay for any teacher that would come forward and would up and be the party in this lawsuit to contest the constitutionality of this particular statute. George Rapollet saw that and called a meeting together of the folks in downtown Dayton. Now, that coincidentally, the name Darwin is in there, but Darwin was a mercantile store. But Mr. Darwin, like everybody in Dayton, attempted to take advantage of the publicity and the opportunity to raise the economics of Dayton. And in regard, he indicated that he had signs, and so every store had a sign or a banner. And to go to the next one, we'll show one of the architects of the program was Fred Robinson. Fred Robinson's drugstore, where it says he had a banner, here's where it started. And you got to understand, I don't know how many thousands of people actually started attending this particular event, but it was because of the nature of it. And this was Robinson Mr. Robinson was known as the hustling druggist. He knew how to make money. In fact, the book that was involved in here that was banned by the Anti-Evolution Act, he sold those books. It was Hunter's Biology. He actually sold those in his drugstore. So he was involved, he and the superintendent of schools and the Board of Education, they were sat down with Rappelet and they decided we need to bring this lawsuit because it'll help the economy. So they looked around for somebody who could we get to be the defendant. Well, there's a contest between Chattanooga. I want to touch on the Chattanooga connection because Chattanooga had a lot of connections. In fact, Chattanooga tried to steal the case away from Dayton, but it didn't work out, and that leads to a lot of surmise. Like somebody told me yesterday, well, if Chattanooga had got that case, could we say in 2025 that Chattanooga would be Monkey Town or Monkey City and so forth? And I said, that's getting into an area that I don't want to go to as to what's happening in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. That's supposed to be funny, I don't know. All right, man, I made that up, by the way. And anyway, Dayton went as far as to put out a flyer, a pump pamphlet about, and they didn't talk much about the trial. They talked about what a wonderful place. It's kind of like the architect sketches we see there every day in Chattanooga.com, which I love. By the way, it showed they put this out and they talked only about the wonderful reasons to come to Dayton. The beautiful scenery, the great water, and it's just a great place to come and raise your family and grow. And this is Mr. Robinson there. He's supposing to purchase one. This was sold at the trial to make also a little money if you would. But anyway, they got John Scopes. And who was John Scopes? Part of the least important guy of the whole thing, except he's been immortalized for history. John Scopes came from Salem, Illinois. He was a substitute science teacher, and he was also the football coach. Now, this football coach had moved to City High School in Chattanooga and taken a new job. And by the way, it might go to a city that knew Colonel Creed Bates. Wake up, Williams. Colonel Bates, do you know who Colonel Bates was?
I didn't know that.
Huh?
I didn't go there, but I knew.
You know, Colonel Bates was the most widely respected principal of the old City High School on 3rd Street. He attended the trial. There's a picture of him along with a photographer who's took a series of pictures that are in the Smithsonian about the trial. But that's the City High connection there. But next picture, this is the most famous visitor to the Scopes trial. It's Joe Minden. His name is Joe Minden. And that's him sitting on the horse up there. He's a chimpanzee. And Joe contributed to the economic rise because there were 6 taxi cab companies up there driving their open air Model Ts. And Joe just dressed up in his suit. By the way, Joe was making $100,000 a year in 1925.
Whoa.
And later became a vaudeville star. And they would ride Joe around with all these spectators. Joe would be sitting in the back, dressed in his regalia, right there, his suit, and people going around Dayton and so forth to publicize the trial. Well, also, if you want Joe picture taken with Joe sitting on his horse sitting there, you could do that for a fee. So Joe increased the economic level. If you go next one, please. Okay. This is the trial showing John's. This is Tom Stewart. Tom Stewart became the United States Senator. He was the prosecuting attorney at the time. And you will see the crowded courtroom. The courtroom was so crowded that they moved it to the lawn because they were afraid the floor was going to collapse in regards to the law. It was tried outside. Now, this is some of the participants. I believe that it's Mr. Butler who's sitting there, but you can see it's crowded. It's tremendous crowds inside. And by the way, you also see right here, that is the WGN microscope. There were 3 of them there. This was the first trial to ever be broadcast on the radio. And like now, every trial is on a television and so forth, but this was big. It also, WGN had just come into existence. So this adds to what I'm trying to say. Everybody was trying to grab notoriety, gain notoriety, or make a few bucks out of the Scopes trial. Tom Stewart was running for re-election in 1926. So he got William Jennings Bryan, of course, was on the popular side of the issue. Would he, after the trial was over, would he go with him on a little campaign tour over into the Squatchy Valley? And that happened on the Saturday. William Jennings Bryan went over there and campaigned to re-elect Tom Stewart and so forth. And then they came back to Chattanooga. And there's a misconception of the fact that William Jennings Bryan did not die in Chattanooga. On Saturday night, he stayed at the old John Ross Hotel, which is there at Patton Parkway, now is still standing. He spent the night there, but Sunday morning he had to give a talk to one of the Methodist churches, and so then he and his wife went back to Dayton. They attended the church service. They went to a church picnic. He ate. William Jennings Bryan was overweight. He had a bad heart. He had diabetes. He ate the typical Southern fried chicken to as much as he could consume. He then went back to the residential house that he was staying at and took a nap and died. And a lot of rumors say he died in Chattanooga. He died in Dayton. And then his body was taken all the way up to Washington to be buried in Arlington Cemetery. Well, there's another story that the big disappointment of William Jennings Bryan is he was wanting to give a final argument in regard to participating in the trial, and Clarence Darrow kind of snookered him in regard that we don't need to argue, find him guilty, go out, and the jury deliberated a long time. There's controversy whether the jury's out 5 minutes or 9 minutes before finding him guilty. But William Jennings Bryan, I am prepared, even though it may not look like it. But anyway, William Jennings Bryan had prepared this 15,000 word final argument, and he never got to give it. But he up inside he wanted it to become part of history, so he went to the Chattanooga Times, and they printed it up. And on the 5th anniversary of the Bryan College, this was distributed in the big benefit to Dayton, in all reality, has to be that Bryan College was created. And it was created in 1930. And it's still there, and it's still a very stable environment of the particular community. But William Jennings Bryan had that tied up. He wanted that to be part of history, and it is a part of history. If you go, you can up and probably get that in the museum. In the basement of the historic courthouse, there is a museum. And what I'm getting to, what I suggest, as far as that handout that you got there, there's 3 as to what to know, what really may be important. There's 3 books. First of all, The Summer of the Gods is a Pulitzer Prize novel by Ed Larson. And Ed Larson has a connection to Chattanooga because he's married to a former TV reporter from Chattanooga. They live in Pepperdine, where he's instructor. Does anybody remember a reporter named Sky Yancey? She was a very attractive reporter here, and she married Ed Larson. So that's one of the connections and so forth. This is what I don't want to sound like I won't tell them back up, but to be risque, this is probably, of all this advertising, worldwide and so forth, this is probably the most shocking, if you want to think about it. And you've had this is a fundamentalist preacher in regard that was there, well known, kind of like Billy Sunday, hellfire and brimstone type preachers. And he's up and showing this sign, this 12-foot sign, read your Bible. Well, that's a great message. Then there today. Well, the only thing about it, they don't tell you that this building that it's into was a 5-stall outhouse or privy. Now, I don't have a connection to that. I don't know if there's because I'm old enough my grandparents over in West Tennessee, they had a non-plumbing type facility. And inside the fact that everybody talks about the legend is that there was always a series of Roebuck catalog for whatever purpose, for reading or otherwise. That doesn't have a historical significance. So I'll quit being risque and get back to proper thing. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is John Scopes. This is on a Randy Mooney book, Randy Moore. And he's kind of a scholarly looking guy. The glasses, you know, he's not in the... Well, anyway, please go to the next one. We take his glasses off and he looks a little bit more attractive. And he was well thought of. He was a football coach, and evidently Ray County had terrible football teams because his record of 1 year that he was there was 4-4-2, and you would think he was Vince Lombardi or Lou Saban. But anyway, but he was also the substitute science teacher. Well, supposedly he is alleged, and there's quite a bit of contrarian testimony about, well, was he just encouraged these witnesses, these two young students, to say that they had up and been taught the evolutionary record by Mr. Scopes when he was substituting one day. Scopes, in his autobiography, the third book, that if you can get one, the second book on there is the one by Tom Davis and Mr. Randy Moore. It is a chronological history, primarily starting beginning of religious battles thousands of years ago, up to the Scopes trial, up to they wrote it in 2024, and you can take that and you can take the Shadow of the Gods by those two, and they will tell you everything that you need to know about the Scopes trial, much better than what I'm trying to tell you in a few minutes. But back up though, there was a guy on here I wanted to show, the Chattanooga Police Department. This guy's a gentleman named Ralph Kelso Rice. And he was in head of security. And he was throughout the trial, kept the crowd from being too loud and so forth. He's also was asked by Mrs. Bryant to escort William Jennings Bryan's body to Arlington Cemetery. So he was on the train and escorted him until he was finally interred. The thing about Mr. Kelso Rice, he made one statement. He didn't really think it's go too profound, but they got kind of noisy one day, and he said, "Quiet, quiet, we're not a bunch of monkeys up here." Well, that's, the guy that was given credit for using monkey trial was H.L. Mencken, who was probably the world's famous cynic of all times. There's some folks who kind of sarcastically indicate that I kind of have been related to him, but I refuse that, but that's not the point. But anyway, Mencken came from the Baltimore Sun, and he is the most famous cynical guy. I mean, he could chew you. He made Mr. Levine over on Fox News and Hannity look like a wimps in regard because what he could up and say. But anyway, Mencken was there. He started out to stay the whole trial. But about the seventh day, the word got back to him that the natives aren't too happy with what you're saying about our beautiful town of Dayton, and we respectfully suggest that maybe you catch one of these trains that go by Dayton and go by every day. So he had to write his final articles back in the safety of Baltimore. And by the way, the trains still go by the courthouse. I've been trying cases up there in years, and you've been all of a sudden here, because now there are no passenger trains. But you got to bear in mind that William Jennings Bryan came up on a special train. Say about that was a mode of transportation. And let's talk about the battle between Chattanooga. Chattanooga tried to steal this case after it had been filed, and even as far as up to the Friday before the weekend, John Neal, the one the sweet-smelling lawyer that I told you about, who was really a brilliant guy, and really, truthfully, probably should be named as the father of the TVA. Now, we say that Senator Norris is the father of TVA, but John Neal was very closely allied with him, and he instructed and told, supposedly, Norris everything that gave him the reputation that when TVA was formed in 1933 or whatever, third it was. But I lost my train of thought here. But Chattanooga wanted that case. They said we can provide. We got a new auditorium. It's air conditioned. And we want it to, and that goes back to would Chattanooga be named as Monkey Town, Monkey City now, but that's, I should have said that, but anyway, they sent John Neal to try to find a federal judge that could maybe enjoin them from proceeding in state court in Dayton and get them so they could get to federal court, because federal court they thought was a better forum to get it declared the statute unconstitutional. Well, they couldn't find the federal court. He was conveniently evasive, and he couldn't be located. And his name was, his last name was Judge Gore, G-O-R-E. And I believe his offspring, so they couldn't get to Judge Gore, but he happened to be a prior descendant, or prior relative of a gentleman who wound up in the White House as vice president. But anyway, they had to stick in Dayton. So they pick up an all-male jury, no ladies, no distance, no, all white. So it shows a real cross-section of the community, but in any respect, they start the trial. But some of the publicity, this picture, anybody ever had your eyes examined or checked by Dr. Harry Lawrence? Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Harry Lawrence, this is Harry Lawrence's mother.
Oh my God.
Her name is Mildred Taylor, and
That's so funny.
Mildred, you got to understand what I'm getting back to Scopes. When he took those glasses off, he was not only liked by his football players, but the ladies liked him. And at that time, evidently, Mildred had a few dates with him. And by the way, Dr. Lawrence, I've talked to him. He's 94 years old, and interesting fellow. He gave me a letter from John Scopes to his mother, and he agreed that we would donate it. It's in the museum up there in Dayton. But they were more friends, but they did date. But part of the legacy of Scopes is he was kind of a ladies' man. Now, you could be a teacher and date your students, but in those days. But anyway, July the 10th, the trial is supposed to start. The Philadelphia Inquirer, this is a national picture of her holding up this banner about pushing advertising for the Scopes trial. And so anyway, let's go to the next one in regard to one of all the ladies. Now see, these are all ladies holding toy monkeys in regard to, and this is Mildred right here. Now, he mentions Scopes, he talks about, Mildred was brunette, he talks about his infatuation with a blonde-headed lady. In fact, that's why he stayed after the trial, because he was going to a church picnic and social, and these ladies in the habit of those days would up and fix a picnic basket, and the male gentleman that attended would bid on and buy the picnic basket. And that's why he said that he stayed there after the verdict came
Just
back.
like in Guilty
So anyway,
Girls.
I don't know which of these were other social friends, but that's Dr. Harry Lawrence's. And she moved to Lookout Mountain, and she lived there. Dr. Lawrence still lives on the backside of the mountain. And his son wrote an article. Robbie, who went to Baylor, wrote a story about his mom. She evidently was quite a character in her old age. And I know people that knew her very well. They said, well, you don't need to tell me anything about it. We've heard it all from the Lawrences up on the mountain. Let's go to the next one. All right, this is another picture. This is in the second book that I recommend you get by Tom Davis and Randy Moore. It's really basically a chronology of the whole scenario. It's got a lot of paper. I don't know if Tom Griscom, some of the things he wrote about the trial, those snips, these are all taken out of newspaper articles of the Times and so forth. Free press wasn't in existence at that time. But this shows Scopes as he is taking a dip in the blue hole, which they didn't have any swimming pools. This was a natural pool where people swim. And this is an unidentified lady here, but obviously he's having a good time. And it says Stokes frolicking with his female friends. This photo, which appeared nationwide in June, which was before the trial, explained that Stokes was keeping cool and not worrying greatly about his trial. So anyway, the next one, the episodes involving unidentified ladies, beautiful blonde, Mildred Taylor and so forth. But to me, the big mystery that still exists, and I've tried to get a picture, took place at Morgan Springs Hotel. Morgan Springs Hotel was on the eastern slope overlooking Dayton, and it was where they had parties and dances. About the only entertainment they had in Dayton at that time was either you could go to a Holy Roller Church, which Nellie Kenyon and H.L. Mencken went to. There was one movie theater, or you could go to these dances and so forth. But this Morgan Springs Hotel is a great mystery. And if anybody can help me get this picture, I'd love to have it, because it supposedly went national. One night during the trial, everybody's up at the Morgan Springs Hotel, and there were two of them, and they both burned down. But the interesting connection to Chattanooga is there's a gentleman in politics here. It's not Bo Watson. It's not what's that other guy's name? He's a state senator. Gardenhauer. That's where he is. Gardenhauer's family owned that hotel at one time, and also they owned a lot of stuff downtown. And you'll notice that there's a plaque tributing to the Gardenhauer family on the main square next to the courthouse in downtown Dayton. But anyway, the night in question, Scopes is up at the trial. Up at the hotel at the pavilion where the music's going, and this former student, unidentified, comes up to him and says, "I'm kind of scared," said, "this pavilion, there's a dark place, pathway over to the hotel, and would you mind walking me back to the hotel?" Well, Scopes, being the gentleman that he was, congenial, so of course I will, young lady. So they walking across, and as they get into the dark part of the pathway, for some reason, who could understand, she gets emotionally distraught and reaches up and grabs him and kisses him. Well, that's rather nice, but coincidentally some flashbulbs went off. And that picture appeared next day worldwide, nationwide, and so forth. And I've tried to find out who that was, but I've checked with the Detroit News, I've checked with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and in the Tennessee Museum. So if any of y'all got any connections on that, I'd like to see, because I think that'd be a good supplement to it in 2020, 25. All right, let's go to the next one again. Okay, this is what in Scopes' book, Center of the Storm, the third book I mentioned. If you can get it, I got a little time. If you can get one, and they're very hard to have, I have one, but this is where Scopes describes the incident about that, which I just paraphrased, but it talks about the floodlights coming on. He was shocked by surprise when she grabbed him around the neck and pressed her lips to his, But that's what he writes about his book, which he wrote in 1967. So anyway, that's an interesting story. Let's go to the next one, whatever. Go on next. Okay, hold that one. Well, that's my one that I think is both. This is, well, I will tell you this. I'll go close with this, but I'll tell you this. Weighing everything, the publicity, the benefit to Dayton and so forth. This is what Scopes says about the trial in regard that I think is significant. The basic freedoms of speech, religion, and academic freedom to teach and to think for oneself defended at Dayton are not so distantly removed. And each generation, each person must defend these freedoms or risk losing them forever. I think that's a rather profound statement in the bottom line of this. Let's go back a little bit to the trial. I was saving that to make a good, lawyers like to make a good impression when they close, but I've done blown that. So let's just talk about the trial. The trial started on, after they couldn't get it to Chattanooga, the trial started on July the 10th. They went through July the 21st. The testimony of the four witnesses the prosecution put up the four witnesses, two boys said, "Oh yeah, he taught that." This big Scopes in his book says, "I'm not so sure that I did teach that subject, but hey, those boys were probably led by their lawyers to up and say that." I find that hard to believe in my beloved profession that lawyers would do that. But in any respect,
this trial in Tennessee.
It goes on, and then they put on the school board people. Yeah, we heard he did that and so forth. Well, then the jury, Clarence Darrow, up and kind of hooked, William Jennings Bryan hadn't tried a case in 30 years, but I believe he was thinking that he might, and many politicians here, now Manny's retired, so I can't talk about it. But anyway, you know, politicians, being a politician is like having a fatal addiction. You can't hardly get rid of it most of the time. And I believe, and it's only my opinion, that the reason William Jennings Bryan got involved in this is that for every aspect, he hoped that he'd come close to being president 3 times. And he thought that, well, maybe I'm on the right side of this issue, at least certainly in the South, that if I'm on the right side of this issue, maybe there'll be a groundswelling of support, kind of like, Governor Cuomo up in New York was kind of open. But in any respect, that maybe that would happen. That's only my opinion, but those who ignore history condemn to repeat it, is all I can say. But anyway, Tom Stewart got elected United States Senator. We got all this great publicity. Joe Manchin made a lot of money. They did all the publicity, but by about the last 4 or 5 days, the town had become a ghost town. They had lost all excitement. But the jury, William Jennings Bryan, all set to make this closing argument, and Darrell said, we don't need to argue, but basically, just let the jury go. That kept Jennings from making his 15,000 word closing argument. And it also cut off a main defense tactic. The case went on appeal to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Jury's out, found him guilty, and here's where the big mistake was made, and whether it's deliberate or unintentional, is as far as the judge, they said, how do you find him guilty? The sentence, the statute did not have criminal time. You didn't have to do any time because when they were enacting it, they didn't want to have a criminal penalty because they thought it'd be more difficult. Putting people in jail might make it hard to pass the legislature in the Tennessee Assembly. Jury's out 5 to 9 minutes. They come back guilty. They don't set a fine. Well, the judge sets a fine of $100. The range was $100 to $500. Well, unfortunately, there's a provision in the Tennessee Constitution that says if any fine over $50 has to be set by the jury. Well, that's an immediate reversal. But it goes on. They try to get the appeal. Jan Neal, he let the time run to get the record typed up. But they go to have an appeal hearing before the Tennessee Supreme Court. Now, I've argued a few cases up there, and if I get 20 minutes, I'm lucky. They had 2 full days of every lawyer got to get up and talk. They raised all these constitutional questions and so forth, and nobody raised the question about the fine. Well, the Tennessee Supreme Court, certainly not like a court that would be affected by politics or anything, even though they did run for public election, but in regard to the Tennessee Supreme Court, on its own, said, well, we're not going to pay attention to constitutional arguments. We're going to reverse it, send it back, because the jury didn't set the fine. And we also have a little message to in their opinion, if you read it, says this, not Erie or whatever way they describe the case, I forget it right now. But anyway, they said this needs to be dismissed. Well, you think, well, okay, it goes back. Maybe the DA wants to try it again, which he didn't. And then, of course, it'll sit there a little while, and then there'll be some action taken. Well, it was discussed in the Tennessee General Assembly over the years, but it lay unrevoked or unreversed or rescinded until 1967, and that opinion. So that's only 40 years later. Finally, a case came out of Arkansas that they could adapt it to, and so they did. The Tennessee General Assembly very wisely dismissed, rescinded the Butler Act and so forth. There's a lot of more pictures of this so forth, but basically, it really was maybe the trial of the century. Some people say OJ was, but it really was very important because of the issue of religion versus evolution. And that's the bottom line, as Scopes said there and so forth, the Freedom, First Amendment and so forth. But the real that's the main issue. That's how it got there. That's what it should stand for. But the truth of the matter is, it was trying to raise the economy of Dayton, which after 100 years, it looks like they're doing it. They got a 1,500 supposedly tire factory. Of course, we get all those in Chattanooga. That some get a good burst of publicity, but where they get enacted is another story beyond my scope of my talk today, I promise you. But in any day, that's Dayton. The symposium, if you want to go more of it, I recommend it to you. But it's Ed Larson and this fellow from England who's a well-renowned speaker in Britain. They've been on all the talk shows, and for some reason they're going to talk in the morning of the 16th. Some reason they've got this old quasi almost incompetent trial lawyer that's going to come and spew some of this wild thoughts like I'm spewing you today. But they are worth coming up there and doing it. It's been a lot of fun. It's a trip. An old man who joined history, reviewing something that I never understood. I didn't understand. And the bottom line of it is, if you poll the people in Dayton 90 days after this happened, after this trial took place, they'd say, we wish this damn thing had never came up here. And but I never knew that, because I remember arguing cases. I would foolishly say how proud I am to be here to participate in this historic sitting and so. And I thought, that gum, half the people, the jury on there, probably gonna rule against me just because they don't like the case. Anyway, I enjoyed the opportunity. If you've got any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer it. But thank you for having me. And let me say this: I don't think I've achieved anything, but everything I have been lucky to receive is because of this community. And in spite of what under the table, some of my cynicism, Chattanooga's been great to me, and I love Chattanooga. Thank you. Larry.